Hi everybody, welcome back to the Intercooler podcast with me, Dan Prosser, Andrew Frankel, sitting opposite me in our studio. This is episode 215, and we're talking about Michael Schumacher. Why? And we do this occasionally, don't we? We dedicate an entire episode to an interesting character from the world of cars or racing.
Yeah.
And what we like is characters who have a bit of depth to them. They don't have to be angels, do they?
This one certainly isn't.
This one certainly isn't. And in the past, we've done Ferdinand Piëch, we've done Enzo Ferrari, Colin Chapman.
Yeah.
And actually, by the way, if anyone wants to go and listen to those episodes, you can just Google it. Just Google the Intercooler podcast, Colin Chapman, and you'll find it straight away. It's that easy. So yeah, we pick out these people that we think have, or certainly have lived very interesting lives.
Yeah.
They've got some light and dark about them.
Yeah.
And hopefully they make for compelling episodes. And Michael Schumacher's just a fantastic fit, isn't he?
He is. I think for most people, he's one of those people. I guess because of the era that he was in. You know, his career spanned 1991 to 2012.
Gosh, yeah.
Which is amazing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
21 years, and I know he had a bit of a break towards the end of it. But I also think that his is a name that will resonate with basically everybody listening to this podcast. I mean, we could do, maybe we'll one day do someone like Max or Lewis or whatever, and there'll be some people who are a bit turned off from modern Formula One and aren't that interested. And we could go back and do Jim Clark, and there'll be people who don't really remember that era or weren't alive in that era, and therefore, don't necessarily connect with it. But Michael Schumacher, I think he is someone who everybody's got an opinion about Michael Schumacher, haven't they?
Yeah.
I think he's an absolutely fascinating bloke. I am myself an enormous fan of the bloke, even though I'm absolutely not blind to many of the unfortunate things that he got up to during the course of his career. But he just struck me as being a really, really interesting topic for a conversation of a sort of single-person podcast.
There's plenty to discuss. And of course, I guess the top line on Michael Schumacher, the racing driver, is that he held all the records until Hamilton came along with Mercedes and beat or matched a load of them. So he did have the most titles in F1. He did have the most wins. He did have the most podiums and the most poles. Lewis has beaten him on all of those, matched him on titles, 7.
Yeah. I think people would be surprised, and I did jot them down, to know just how many titles Michael still has. If I could just put on the
Go on.
the spectacles. So, okay, so
how many records he still has?
How many records? Many records he still has. So, between 92 and 95, he outqualified his teammate 56 times in a row.
56?
56 times in a row.
Oh, 92 and 95.
Yeah.
So
in his entire career before Mercedes, he was only outqualified by a teammate 12 times. That's 260 odd Grand Prix.
Yeah.
He still has the record for the most seasons containing at least one win.
Yeah.
He still has the record for the most wins not scored from pole position. He still has the record for the most wins, including a fastest lap. He still has the highest percentage of podium finishes during the course of the season, which was in 2002, which was 100%.
Yeah, that was unbelievable that year.
Yeah, he still has the most fastest laps, and he still has the most hat-tricks, i.e. pole position, fastest lap, and win in one race, which he has 22 of them. So all those, despite the fact that...
And the most consecutive titles. 5.
The most exactly, 5 between 2000 and 2004. Yeah.
And most races left in the season when becoming world champion, 2002.
Oh,
6.
you and I have always to be looking at the same data, haven't we?
6. Yeah, you're right. There are still loads of really meaningful...
Yeah, and the point is that he... I mean, if you went back and recalculated, just sort of conveniently omitting the Mercedes years, particularly in percentage terms, without Mercedes, so as it stands right now, and this will probably change before the end of the season, Lewis has a fractionally better win-to-start ratio. Michael is fractionally under 30%. Lewis is fractionally over 30%. I suspect by the end of the season, Michael will be back on top of that one. But if you recalculated, and as I say, conveniently omitting the 3 not great years at Mercedes between 2010 and 2012, you'd be off the scale.
Yeah. Gosh.
So, so he's not. I think there is this sense that Michael Schumacher was the most statistically successful Formula One driver until Lewis Hamilton came along. And insofar as Lewis has won the same number of championships but has won more Grand Prix, because he's done more Grand Prix, then I guess there is some truth in that. But actually, I think just concluding, therefore, that Lewis was a better driver than Michael.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff is far too shallow, isn't it?
Far too shallow, yeah.
It takes a much more sort of thorough and detailed analysis.
I think what is extraordinary about Lewis is that he's managed to do all that he has done without ever having to resort to some of the things that Michael
And we'll
did.
come on to those.
Yeah.
We will come on to those. I think we should look back to his early F1 career because he finished third in the championship in his first full year. So he actually started midway through 91?
He started at Spa in 1991
Yeah.
because basically he owes it all to Bertrand Gachot
Yeah, getting arrested.
getting arrested for squirting mace into the face of a taxi driver in London and ending up in Chokey. And so, yes, he went and he did a first race in a Jordan. Eddie Jordan believed he had a contract with Michael for the whole of the rest of the year, but it wasn't written down on paper and therefore not worth the paper it wasn't written on. And Flav went and snapped him up to go and drive Benetton's. And then came 92.
And his first full year, 1992, he finished third in the championship, which is remarkable in itself. And he finished on the podium in half the races, including one win, in his first full year. So, I mean, you must remember what it was like watching this young German come in.
We knew.
Really? Is that apparent?
Yeah, we absolutely knew. We knew when we first saw Max, and when we first saw Alonso, and we first saw Ayrton. Yeah, it was
that apparent.
I've got one more statistic which I just want to read out. He beat his teammate, and his teammates included Martin Brundle, Riccardo Patrese, Jos Verstappen, JJ Leto, Johnny Herbert, Eddie Irvine, Rubens Barrichello. Every single year of his career, from when it started, his first full season in 92 to when he left Ferrari at the end of 06, apart from in 97, when he was disqualified from the championship, but he had already beaten them on points,
does it?
and in 99 when he broke his leg at Silverstone. Every other year, he lunched his teammate.
Gosh, yeah, that says a lot.
So on merit alone, so forget being disqualified and setting aside the broken leg, when there's no question at all that he would have. He had to be world champion in 99 if he hadn't broken that leg. I mean, that is absolutely unbelievable. From 92 to 2006, 15 seasons. And that's the measure, isn't it? Because you can always say, oh, yeah, but he had a better car, and therefore it was easy. But your teammate's got the same car.
You still got to beat your teammate.
And to beat all those, frankly, pretty amazing drivers across that period of time.
That is something.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask if he was the most complete competitor we've seen in F1, because he really pioneered fitness and nutrition.
He did.
He had mega qualifying speed, but also stunning race pace through a stint.
Maintained it, never gave up.
Very good in the wet.
Unbelievable. Spain 96.
We'll come to that.
Oh.
Very, very good racecraft, wheel to wheel.
Yeah.
But also the sort of less tangible stuff. He could build a team around him.
Yeah.
He could play the political game. He could intimidate opponents.
Yeah.
He could do it all.
I think that point about intimidating opponents, I think it's something that Senna probably mastered as well, better than anyone, until Michael came along. And so much, I think, of the art of being a great rather than a good Formula One driver is winning the race before you've even got in the car. Yeah. Because people see that helmet approaching and they just think, oh my God.
Yeah.
And your teammate is just humiliated. And he was so good at, I mean, is you say the most complete driver? Yes, except complete implies, doesn't it, not flawed?
Yeah, it does.
And he was flawed. But he certainly had the most complete approach.
Yeah.
To all aspects. As you say, he was fitter than any other driver. He brought that to a completely new level. But I think more than anything else, he worked harder than any other driver. You know, there are more stories than you could ever be able to count about Michael always being the first into the pit garage in the morning and the last out of it in the evening. He was the absolute opposite of the arrive and drive driver.
Yeah.
who just left it to the mechanics to sort everything else, and then he'd get in there and go out there and do whatever it is that he did. Michael knew that it's not just, him being an extra set of hands on an extra bait. He just knew he had to inspire his team to make them want to work that hard too, to set that example so that between them, they all raised their games. And if you were going to do something like he did in 96 and go to a basket case like Ferrari was then, and to put it in a position where, frankly, he should have been champion in 99 and then go on to that extraordinary win of 5 consecutive titles. That's what you have to do. And I don't think that even Lewis has as good a claim to motivating and inspiring a team around him as Michael did.
So why Schumacher was a 2-time world champion after 94 and 95.
Yeah.
And he gets approached by Ferrari.
Yeah. I
don't know who did the approach, Todd, Braun, whoever. Why does he go? Because Ferrari is a basket case at that point.
Yeah. Because I guess it's because I think it was probably Ross, Braun, sold him a vision. A vision that was turned out to be absolutely true. That between him and Michael and Jean Todt and Rory Byrne, they were going to, and this is perhaps something which Ferrari is starting to look at now, they were going to change the way that Ferrari had always done things, which was a very Italian way of doing things.
Yeah.
And, wonderful though it was in some ways, it hadn't brought a huge amount of success. And Ferrari at the time were in this terrible drought. No championships since Jody Scheckter won his in 1979. He sold him a vision. And, what Formula One driver, look at Lewis now, what Formula One driver doesn't want to race for the Scuderia? And I think Michael was already a double world champion. And he absolutely proved his point. Ayrton Senna, very sadly, by that stage had already departed the scene, his greatest rival. And I think he just thought to himself, well, yes, we can continue to do this, or we can do something which is going to secure a legacy far beyond a sort of statistical count of Grand Prix wins. We're going to get the greatest, most famous historic Formula One team of them all and put it back where it belongs.
Well, I've got in my notes here that probably is his greatest achievement. Forget all the statistics.
Yeah.
That is his greatest achievement, isn't it? Being a central part, a fundamental part of turning around the Ferrari F1 team.
Absolutely right.
It's got to be. And it's made him not just a multiple world champion, but an icon.
Yeah.
Doing all of that made him an icon in sport.
Yeah. Do you remember it all?
So what I remember is the dominance.
Yeah.
The 2000s onwards. And being put off by it.
Oh, God, I was put off by it. It was so boring, wasn't it? I can remember somebody, I can't remember who it was, somebody saying that a really, really bad weekend for Michael Schumacher was a dream for most other drivers on the grid, i.e. you're only on the podium.
Yeah.
You haven't won the race.
And I bet he was furious about that, maybe with himself, maybe with other people, but
whatever.
You just know it would have affected him because he was that kind of competitor.
Yeah.
Let's rewind a little bit and talk about some of his great drives. And you've already mentioned Spain 96.
Yeah.
What happened? Oh, hang on. Before you do, just to set the scene. I saw this quote again from one Sterling Moss describing Schumacher at Barcelona in 1996.
Yes.
When he won the race emphatically. And Moss said, that wasn't a race. That was a demonstration of brilliance. The man is in a class of his own. There has never been a driver so clear of the field in ability. It was one of the most fantastic demonstrations of skill I've ever seen. Blimey.
And if ever there was an example of what being said being not as important as the person who was saying it.
Yeah, there you go.
And that was Sterling. And he knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened that weekend?
Well, I mean, what happened? So I can't remember the name of the car. I think it was the F410 or something, wasn't it? It was it was one of the very early John Barnard cars. It was completely unreliable. It was a pig to drive. I think Eddie Irvine actually said it was, quote unquote, undrivable. And Saturday was dry and they qualified, goodness knows where, somewhere in the middle order or something. But then on Sunday it rained. And we were just treated to a demonstration of car control. You just, it's all on YouTube. Just go and watch it. There were times when he was 3 to 4 seconds quicker than anybody else on the circuit. He was driving it like a rally car at times. Towards the end of it, I think water was getting into the engine, and he actually had some reasonably major electronic issues, and he had to back right off. But it was just, sometimes, we don't really like, do we, when drivers just disappear.
No.
You just think, oh God, really, really boring. And we're in that era at the moment with Max. But sometimes, when what they are doing is so, and that's one of the great things about wet weather, isn't it? Because you can usually see so much more clearly where the difference is being made. And to watch Michael drive that car, it was just a joy. Because Sterling was absolutely right. There wasn't anybody else in that race. It was 2 races. It was Michael and everybody else.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. And this is his first year at Ferrari.
Yeah.
When it's not going terribly well, is it? I can probably pull out.
I don't know how many times a Ferrari retired in 1996, but it would have been plenty.
Yeah. Yeah. So he had plenty of podiums and a handful of wins that year, but lots of retirements. So it must have been very frustrating for him.
Yeah.
But then Barcelona, it just sounds like I don't remember watching the race. I haven't even seen it back, but it does sound like an extraordinary display of skill. There was a surprising line in the Schumacher documentary on Netflix, which is, I think it was Netflix. Definitely, it's really worth a watch.
Yeah.
That is.
Which was made with the approval and indeed the involvement of his family.
Yeah.
So I thought it was, sorry, just before you get onto it, I thought it was a really, really great documentary. And I feared about it because when I heard that the family was involved, I thought, well, they are quite understandably going to want to make this as rosy a reflection of, Michael's life as possible. And they're going to probably just gloss over the tricky bits, but they didn't. And I thought it was a really, really good. It was very, very moving. When Mick, his kid, is at the end, is saying that he'd give it all up to have his father back as he was.
Yeah,
I thought that was incredibly moving. But I thought it was also actually quite a. I think it was a fairly balanced view of the man, and also provided insights into him, which I never knew about. So well worth checking out.
I think Jean Todt reveals that they were considering replacing Michael a couple of years after that '96 Barcelona win.
Exactly right,
which is amazing.
Yeah,
I wonder what that was all
about. And
they
did replace him in the end. So they did. In 2006, they got rid of Michael. It was very, very similar to what happened to Lewis at Mercedes. They were future planning.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so should we now talk about some of the controversies? Or were there any other outstanding performances that we should
Well, there
highlight?
was that performance, wasn't it, where his car got stuck in 5th gear and he still came second.
Yeah.
He did 2 pit stops.
Was that Monaco?
No.
Oh, no, that was it Barcelona again?
No, I can't remember. Sorry.
Not sure.
Yeah, and the car was apparently stuck in, and he managed to do 2 pit stops and driving around without ever changing gear. He was still quicker than all but one other driver out there, which was fairly extraordinary. It's interesting in the documentary they almost sort of gloss over the Ferrari years because it was just so relentless. There were so many extraordinary drivers. Actually, sort of picking out 1 or 2 or whatever becomes more difficult. But yes, I guess now is as good a time as ever to talk about. I mean,
let me just very quickly, just so we've got them on record.
Yeah.
The stats: 7 World Championships, 91 wins in 306 starts, 155 podiums, 68 poles, 77 fastest.
So hang on. So how many starts?
306
and 155 podiums.
Yeah.
So he finished on the podium in over half the races in which he ever competed.
50% podium.
Good.
Right.
And that includes Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah. Blimey. Well, that says a lot, doesn't it? That probably says it all. That is staggering.
So if you were in Formula One between 1991 and 2012, chances are that one of the 3 places on the podium in any race you were in was already taken by one person.
Yeah. So there are only 2 spots to fight for.
That must have been quite dispiriting.
Gosh. It must have been extraordinary to compete against him or try.
Yeah. I've got something else I want to say about him.
Go
I think the other thing that people, which also comes across really clearly in the documentary, which I think people probably don't appreciate about Michael Schumacher, is he was not one of these guys who was ever, when he was coming through the ranks, in a position just to chuck money at the problem, buy drives.
Yeah,
Came from a
important.
working class family.
Yeah.
There's this bit where they talk about when in his karting years, they used to go through the rubbish bins at the racetracks and dig out tyres, which people had discovered had discarded, as being worn out and not good for anything, and he'd stick them on his car because he couldn't afford to buy new ones and go out and win the race. So he grew up in the school of hard knocks. He did it the hard way, and through sheer relentless talent, he won German Formula 3, didn't he? He won the Macau Grand Prix. Did some sports car racing too with Mercedes-Benz, the Dream Team with him and Carl Wendinger and somebody else. So he, so often there are so many drivers, aren't there, that you kind of, their light gleams for an instant and is gone, not because they did anything wrong or they had a big accident or whatever, but they just run out of resource. And so many drivers who we look at today and we think, well, you probably wouldn't be on the grid if you didn't have, daddy and a bazillion pounds behind you. Michael managed to do all that he did, and obviously there came a time when he was incredibly wealthy, but that was because they were paying him. He did it on merit, pure, unquestioned, unadulterated merit. No one can ever say, "Oh yeah, but he had it easy from the start. He always had the best stuff. He always had the right ins with the right teams. None of that.
No.
Which to me, you have to see what he achieved in that context, because to me it makes his achievements all the more extraordinary.
Okay, then the controversies, because I struggle with these.
Yeah,
I do struggle with these.
Yeah, me too. You're talking about
Adelaide 94.
Adelaide 94, and was it Jerez 97?
97.
Yeah.
So Adelaide 94. I can't remember the exact permutations, but Damon Hill has got a great chance of winning the World Championship.
Yeah,
beating Schumacher to it.
Yeah,
and the footage is out there, and you can go and watch it and on YouTube and decide for yourself what's going on.
I think we know, don't we?
It looks to me
Michael just drove into him.
It looks to me like Michael drove into him to stop him coming through, so that he. I guess the point being, if both retired,
if neither finished the race, Michael was champion.
Yeah. And the incident happens, the collision occurs, neither finishes the race, and Michael's champion.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. Well, my honest view on this is that it was absolutely intentional. He knew what he was trying to do. He knew what the outcome would be if he could damage both cars enough that, well, certainly Hill's car enough that he didn't finish. I think he did it intentionally, and I think that's cheating.
Yeah, and he got away with it.
Why did he get away with that?
Good question.
Gosh, it's bizarre, isn't it?
Ross Brawn had an interesting take on this. So, while on one hand, absolutely saying it was wrong, he shouldn't have done it. He said, in Michael's mind, in that moment, even that, and he's not even justifying, he's not excusing, he's just explaining it. In Michael's mind, in that moment, it was the right thing to do. It was a racing instinct. He just did it. He probably didn't think very hard about it. He just did what it took because he'd come up the hard way. Always had to do whatever it took to get where he needed to go.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that's what was required. And that he would later look back on it and just think, that was a terrible thing to do. But at the time, he felt it was the only thing to do. I think that's probably, and again, that is not to excuse it, but I think when people, you admire so much suddenly behave like that, and goodness knows, Ayrton Senna was, cut from a similar cloth. You have to try. I think you have to try to understand, and I think that's what happened. I think that's what happened then. But I think, to me, what is less forgivable is that 3 years later, with that much more experience, that much more maturity, he does it again to Jacques Villeneuve.
Yeah, he's a double world champion at this point. He's won a lot of races.
Yeah.
Nothing to prove. Okay, maybe with your first, you're not yet a world champion. You're that ambitious. Yeah. You're prepared to do anything.
Everything you've ever fought for since you were, I think he was 4 when he first got on the card.
Yeah. You're prepared to do anything
to
achieve that goal.
Yeah.
maybe it's not justifiable, but maybe it's understandable.
It's certainly more understandable.
But then Jerez, 97, already a two-time world champion,
that to me,
well-established, multimillionaire.
No excuses for that.
Yeah. So again, exactly what the permutations were, I can't remember. But he's got a chance of winning the championship against Jacques Villeneuve.
Yeah. But this time it didn't work.
It didn't work, and
because he went out and Jacques didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you hear Martin Brundle in commentary saying,
"That's not going to work."
What does he say? He said, "You hit the wrong part of him, my friend," or something.
Yes, exactly.
So certainly Brundle's first instinct was that it was absolutely intentional.
Patrick Head showed me the car. I once got a tour. Patrick very kindly showed me around all the old race cars.
Wow.
And they've still got the car with the tyre marks on the side pod.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen
it. What a significant car.
Yeah. But he was disqualified from the entire championship.
So he got pinged for that one, didn't he?
Properly pinged.
Yeah.
And I think that was a proper punishment, humiliation of being, you have behaved so badly. We're basically going to make out we are deeming you not even to have taken part in this competition. And I wonder whether that didn't include a bit of overs for him being allowed to get away with it in 94. I think that because he got away with it in 94, I think they just had to think, okay, fine, we've got to nail this.
Come down hard now. Just as an aside, back to 94, Damon Hill had a very good chance of winning that championship.
Yeah.
Had Schumacher not done what he did, maybe Hill would be a two-time world champion.
Yeah.
Do you think...
David would have been a two-time world champion.
Yeah. But do you think Damon reflects on that and is frustrated by that? Or do you think it's actually a part of him that didn't want to win the 94 championship given how that season started?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we would love Damon, if you happen to be listening to this, to come on. I suspect he's been asked so many times he probably had enough of answering the question. So on your point of, given what had happened that season, obviously the appalling, tragic death of his teammate at Imola, no, I think it probably would have meant even more to him.
Because he lifted that team up, didn't it?
In exactly the same way that his dad had done for Team Lotus in 1968.
So perhaps it would have been more poignant.
So I think it would have been absolutely incredible for him to have done it. I think, and again, I can't speak for Damon, but I think that what would have stuck in his craw maybe even more than getting taken out at Adelaide was the suspicion that he wasn't fighting on a level playing field, that Michael was driving a car that certainly had the ability to break the rules.
Whether or not they were using it.
Well,
is that the implication?
Yeah. So they were, and actually McLaren were investigated too as well. And McLaren were completely cleared. But they discovered, I think it was like option, there was some option, I think there were some various options on the steering wheel, and there was a screen and you could sort of scroll through them, and there was the 1 to 10, wasn't there, which all the normal stuff. And then someone had the forethought to look a bit further and got down to, there was no option 11 or 12, but suddenly there was option 13. And that was traction control. The car had traction control on it. So the rules said you're not allowed to use traction control, and the car had traction control. So how did they get away with it? Because the car had traction control. They just said, well, we had traction control, but we chose not to use it.
But we don't know if they did.
And the rules said you couldn't use it. They didn't say you couldn't have it.
Yeah.
So on that, well, some people might think pretty flimsy excuse. Michael raced through that season and, improperly in the last race, took a championship which Damon would be absolutely forgiven, thinking was rightly his. And I imagine that the fact that for that whole season, the suspicion, never proven, that he was up against a car which wasn't playing by the rules, that must have been really difficult, particularly in all the terrible, terrible circumstances in which he had to fight at the back end of that season.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So very, very, those extraordinary Ferrari years that followed, 2000, 2004, 5 consecutive championships.
Yeah.
A stack of wins, dozens and dozens of wins in that time.
Yeah.
We'd never seen anything like that in Formula One before, had we? And I think, like all of these periods of dominance, It's a shame because you're watching something extraordinary,
Yeah.
but it doesn't make for compelling viewing.
I'm just trying to think back briefly to when, so Fangio won the championship. He won 4 on the trot, 54, 5, 6, 7. But even he wasn't as dominant as Michael was, even though his win to start ratio is to this day. So he did 51 Grand Prix and won 24 of them. So almost half, he had an almost 50% chance of winning any Grand Prix that he was in. So that was pretty dominant. After that, no, I really don't think that there was. People tended not to. I mean, Prost, I suppose, he won 4, but he always had Senna to contend with. So no, we'd never seen anything like it. And it's interesting that it's kind of happening. It's happened again, and probably we're in the middle of a third because it happened with Lewis, and then we're now, Max is going to become a quadruple champion this year, isn't he?
It looks that way.
Yeah.
It looks that way.
So there's something interesting, isn't it, that you can, something to do with the regs or whatever, that, a team can now establish these extraordinary periods of dominance. But no, you're absolutely right. Between 2000 and 2004, we'd never seen anything like it.
So the 2002 year is extraordinary. 17 Grand Prix that year. And I'll just run through his results, right? First, third. First, second. First, second. First, second. First, second, first. So how many points has he dropped all season there? 16 or something?
So that presumably was the season in which he won it at the earliest.
Yeah.
Yeah. After, yeah. Yeah.
Bloody hell. That is amazing.
That
First or second, apart from one Grand Prix when he came third. That is extraordinary.
So that's what they meant. That weekend he came third. He must have been absolutely gutted.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, gosh, I don't know if you remember exactly what happened in Monaco in 2004. Does that ring a bell? Monaco 2004?
Remind me.
Well, I don't know, but this is how his season went otherwise. Win, 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 win. Monaco retired. Win, 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 win.
I have a feeling he crashed it in the rain. There might be people shouting at their...
Do you know, I can
find
out. Talk amongst yourself.
I'm probably completely wrong, but I have a memory of him sticking it in the wall at Saint Devote. But
yeah, the retirement of Michael Schumacher
through.
Ooh, I don't know. I can't find it quickly enough. But you may well be right. And I don't know. He stopped on lap 26. Maybe I can find it this way. Collision damage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ouch.
So even geniuses. Well, do you remember Ayrton in '88?
Yeah.
88? I think it was 88.
Yeah. He parked it, didn't he?
He just lost concentration. He was leading by a mile and just parked it in the wall on the entrance to the tunnel.
God, so Michael absolutely at the height of his powers there.
Yeah.
He'd already won 5 in a row. Blimey. Well, there you go. So, those Ferrari years were extraordinary. And then Fernando Alonso rocks up in that mega Renault.
Yeah.
And actually, Alonso's 2005, I think it was, the start to that season was unbelievable. He dropped just a handful of points in the first half of the season. But those two had a good old ding-dong, didn't they, for a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, Michael, I think he still came second and third on those two titles.
Third and second, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was not exactly off the ball, but those were pretty exciting seasons. And then, of course, he retires at the end of 2006.
Yes.
7-time world champion, 91 Grand Prix wins, extraordinary career. Did you think he was going too early?
Yes, I did. I absolutely did. I didn't see anything. He might have no longer have had the best car, but there was nothing to suggest to me that he was still anything other than the best driver out there. But maybe he just thought to himself, well, I've had no title for the last couple of years. 7 was already 2 more than anybody else had ever got. So, he probably thought that'll do. He probably thought, because I think he would have been completely forgiven for thinking, nobody else is ever going to do that.
Yeah.
Certainly not in my lifetime. My legacy is secure. I did what I intended to do with Ferrari. What more is there to prove? And maybe he was just, had enough of being on the circuit, being away from the family, his very young family, all that time. And maybe he just thought, I think he said retired. I think he said, I'm going and I'm going to stay gone. But maybe in the back of his mind, he thought maybe we'll just have a look, see it, just see how it feels. Yeah, and obviously, history recounts that he probably should have stayed retired.
So there we go. That's the next topic, isn't it? The comeback.
Yeah. I was very surprised.
Were you?
Yeah. Because I know it was the team that, he's coming back to the team that had won the championship the previous year.
Yeah.
But that was under fairly extraordinary, exceptional circumstances. So that was Brawn. It was obviously bought by Mercedes-Benz and became the factory team.
This is 2010.
Yeah. And he was in his 40s even then, wasn't he? He was 40. I think he was 40. He was born in 69, so he came back in 2010. So he would have been 40 when he came back. Up against a very young, hot teammate, son of a former world champion, Nico Rosberg, and I thought it was ambitious. I don't think that anybody thought that they'd be championship contenders. I think that it was probably going to be a rebuild from scratch job like Ferrari had been. Mercedes hadn't been a works racing team for blimey since 1955, so whatever that was, 55 years. So I was surprised, but he obviously hated being away.
Yeah,
and thought he could still do it.
What do you generally think when sports people make these comebacks after being away for a little while? Do you think it's a shame that they can't put it behind them?
It just depends, doesn't it? I mean, there's the sort of, I guess, the traditional sport that people, look to is boxing. Mike Tyson is in the middle of a comeback. He's my age. He's certainly in his mid-50s.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it's just horrible, isn't it, to see these old soldiers being pummeled around the ring, and you're just thinking, oh God, what's happening inside your head? Well, do you really need to be doing this? And whatever. Drivers, I think actually Karun Chandok has done a fantastic piece for us, which if it isn't on the website now will be very shortly, looking at exactly this issue, going back and looking at all the drivers who went away and came back. I mean, there are loads of them. He came up with a list of 9 not just normal drivers, but world champions.
Really?
Who took a break from the sport and then reappeared with, dramatically different levels of success. Someone like Alain Prost went away from the 92 season, came back, won the world title in 93. But you look at, Nigel Mansell's return. He did win a race. He won the Australian Grand Prix on comeback, which was amazing, and he was 41 when he did it, and he is the most recent person in his 40s to have won a race, but that was over 30 years ago. So Lewis and Fernando, that might be worth bearing in mind. But then he went, but then there was that awful half season with McLaren,
right,
where he was up against a bloke called Mika Häkkinen and Dave Basile.
Yeah.
So. I mean, I think so much of it depends on age, the era that you're in, because I think it is now perceived that the Formula One cars are massively easier to drive than once they were, which is why, Fernando Alonso has contracted into his mid-40s. And I think 20 years ago, the idea of a person in their mid-40s being competitive in Formula One would have been, 2004, when they had those 950 horsepower, 600 kilo F1 cars.
Yeah.
I think the idea of someone in their mid-40s being competitive in one of those would have been, fairly unimaginable, but it is today. So, I'm not sure there are any sort of hard and fast rules. I mean, Niki Lauda went away for a long time, came back, won a championship.
Yeah. That's the best example, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he won it by half a
point. Yes, he did, yeah.
And he didn't win it because he was quicker than Alain Prost. He won it because he was smarter. And that's the relative times in their careers. I mean, Prost was nothing like as experienced as Lauda was. So it can work, but I think if you're coming back in a period where the cars are more difficult to drive, and you're not coming back as so Karun has talked about the possibility of Max taking a break in 26 for a year just seeing who's got on top of the new regs best and then landing a drive with them in 27. But, Max in 27 he won't even be 30.
So he's got time, isn't he?
So he's got time. Whereas Michael was 40. Huge difference. And, he'd been out for, how long was he out for? 3 seasons.
Yeah.
He hadn't sort of taken a year away. I mean, he would have had time to get properly rusty. So I think it was a massive gamble. And I think most people at the time, and I don't think I'm being brilliant with the benefit of hindsight, because I think we said this at the time, that, we can't really see how this is going to work out really well.
Yeah, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And so he was up against Nico Rosberg for 3 years at the Mercedes team, 2010, 2011, 2012. Now, I'll just give you the bare statistics because they tell a story, but we'll interrogate this story a little bit further afterwards. So Michael finished 9th, 8th and 13th in the championship. Nico Rosberg pretty much doubled Schumacher's points tally that first season. Yeah. They were much closer that second season, just a few points between them. Rosberg still finishing ahead. Yeah. And in the third season, Rosberg almost doubled his points tally again. Yeah. So on that evidence alone, it appears that Michael really did get humbled, actually, by this young Nico Rosberg. Yeah. Of course, we know Rosberg went on to become a world champion, beat Lewis in the same car. So, actually, a phenomenal driver. Yes. He really is. Yeah.
Lewis was unlucky that season.
Lewis was very unlucky that season. But does that paint a picture of a washed-up old boxer who should never have come back?
Not quite. I think one of the things is that if you look hard enough, you can prove almost anything you like with statistics. And I'm about to do exactly that. Good. Because I've been digging around quite actively and unashamedly trying to find some kind of statistical, at least evidence, that the sort of headline comparison between Nico Rosberg and Michael Schumacher wasn't quite as terrible as it might have appeared for Michael. And what I've come up with is in Michael's final season, you look at the races that year and look at the races that they finished. Both cars only finished in 10 of the races. But in those 10 races, Michael finished ahead of Nico 7 times. Nico finished ahead of Michael 3 times. What is that indicative of? Who knows? Maybe, Nico had a lot more problems than Michael, but kept him going. But, okay, what that doesn't paint a picture of is someone who's completely washed up. And I think, Michael had a huge number of retirements that year, which largely explains why he finished so much further behind Nico in the Drivers' Championship. And I think the 2011 stats, which you pointed to, where they were much, much closer, are probably a fairer reflection. So what am I saying here? I am saying that it was the wrong team because the Mercedes wasn't competitive. I don't think that during those 3 seasons, I'm not saying for a moment that he was a better driver than Nico Rosberg, because that would be unsupportable. But I think what I am saying is that he was still getting better at the time of his final retirement. And that certainly in that final season, the points gap between at the end of the season is not a fair reflection of the relative abilities they showed in the car during the course of that year. But he still shouldn't have come back, and Rosberg was still clearly demonstrably the better driver of the two of them at during the period that they were teammates.
Yeah. So in his final year, 2012, he did score a podium at the European Grand Prix, which was Valencia.
I remember the press conference.
Oh.
Well, because it'd been such a long time since we'd seen Michael Schumacher in a press conference. And he was there with that sort of half smile of his. And somebody did say to him, what does it feel like to be back? And he went, I can't remember what he did exactly, but he sort of, pointed over there and said, well, it's fine, but I'd just rather be sitting there. I mean, he still, to him, third was still, second loser.
Even though he hadn't won a race since late 2006. Yeah. Or even been on the podium. Yeah. He still wanted to be winning, didn't he?
Still wanted to win it, yeah.
Because that's Michael Schumacher. Yeah. And he didn't get pole at Monaco that year, but he set the fastest time in qualifying that year.
Is that the year that he parked it across the track?
I think so, but he had a penalty as well from the previous race, so he had to start sixth. Okay. But he was fastest in qualifying around Monaco.
which isn't too shabby, is it?
Not too shabby.
In an uncompetitive car.
In your early 40s.
Now, sometimes uncompetitive cars become competitive at Monaco because if you haven't, because the Monaco puts
and vice versa.
Requirements. Yeah, exactly.
So the comeback. I mean, was it ill-advised? Does it tarnish his legacy? I suppose it doesn't really matter that much. Clearly he wasn't at his best. Because at his best he was absolutely phenomenal.
I don't think it tarnishes his legacy, because that would suggest that it was. I mean, maybe it was ill-advised or whatever, but it was somehow improper. There's nothing improper about it. He took a punt. Yeah. And very brave.
It's brave. That's it.
Didn't need the money.
No.
Didn't need anything. But just thought he could still do it. I think, his choice of team, maybe it was the only choice that he had. I suspect that they came to him and said, we're just going to throw everything at this. And he thought, well, it's Mercedes. He'd raced for Mercedes in sports cars. He was a Mercedes man through and through.
And it's now or never.
Yeah, and it was essentially his country's national team in Formula One. And maybe he thought to himself, how would I feel about it if I didn't do it? And I look back, and maybe he takes the view that the same view that I take, is that almost without exception, you tend only to regret the things in life that you didn't do.
Yeah.
And maybe he didn't regret it. Maybe he thought, I came along and actually I gave it a pretty good go. It didn't work out with the car, but against someone half my age, I gave a reasonable account of myself, and I'm now going to go off. And well, as we know, he didn't have the retirement that anybody could have wanted. But
it's been just over 10 years since his skiing accident.
Yeah.
He's 55 now.
Yeah.
We don't know anything really about his condition.
Nor should we.
No. And I think the most we've ever been told was in that documentary when Mick Schumacher says he's here but he's not the same. So we can infer what we like from that.
Yeah.
And we don't need to talk about it anymore. So Michael Schumacher, it's been 30 years since his first championship, 20 years since his last. That's why we're doing it now. And really, I mean, clearly a complex guy, flawed in some ways. But I think my lasting impression of him, certainly having done this podcast, is that he was a ferocious competitor and one of those guys who is almost impossible to beat when they are at their best and when they have the equipment that they need.
Something else I would like to add. I used to know a bloke called Robin Grant. Robin's sadly no longer with us, but he used to run the fabrication shop at Benetton. And he knew Michael, as you would, really well. All through his years at Benetton. So that was, 92, 3, 4, 5. And he said in all that time, as a person, he never heard anyone have a bad word to say about Michael.
Wow.
He was apparently a fabulous person on a personal level. No arrogance, no ego. As keen as anybody else to make it work. Incredibly respectful of and appreciative of the role of everybody in the pit garage, everybody in the design office. Robin thought Michael walked on water as a person, not just as a driver. And I think that when we sit here and we do a podcast like this, and so much of it is based on statistics and things that we saw on the telly and heard this, I think it is important to, just to focus and reflect for a moment on the fact that there's a bloke behind all of this, a absolutely flawed human being, but a family man with a very loving, devoted family, and I think also the way that Coroner Schumacher has protected his legacy and respected his privacy. In the 11 years since that terrible accident is absolutely, the strength of her and her family, I just think is absolutely extraordinary. And so I think there's Michael the man as well as Michael the driver, isn't there? And as I said on this podcast many, many times before, to me it's as much about the person as it is about the driver. And I think that despite the fact that he was clearly a flawed human being, despite the fact he clearly did things he shouldn't have done in racing cars, which I suspect he went on to bitterly regret much more than he'd ever own up to in public. He was more than a great driver. He was a great person too. Why are we talking about him in the past tense? That's terrible, isn't it? it?
It is. Well, yes, it is. It is terrible.
I apologise for that.
He is a great person. Yeah. Well, actually, and it's fantastic to hear that.
Yeah.
To know that he is a great guy.
Yeah.
And not a bully, not a narcissist or anything else.
No.
It's really nice to hear that someone who knew him well felt that way about him.
Yeah. Exactly.
Great, Michael Schumacher. Blimey, what a life! Now, give us some suggestions for individuals
Who
that you
would
want
you like us to talk about?
Yeah, anyone. You can suggest anyone you like, but if they've lived a really interesting life with highs and lows, light and shade, I think they make more compelling podcasts. So
something to do with cars would be helpful.
Oh yeah, if there's yes, hopefully that goes without saying.
I mean, we could do Marilyn Monroe, but I'm not sure.
Maybe not. That might be slightly beyond our purview. Now, thank you all for listening. All I'm going to ask you to do is subscribe. So if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. If you're listening via a podcast app, just subscribe to the show or follow the show on that podcast app. It really helps us. Honestly, it does. And it means you don't miss an episode. So please do that. And we'll be back again next week.
Bye.